In a quiet settlement cradled between two low hills, a 19-year-old girl named Ifeoma woke before the first rooster found its voice. Her skin, rich as rain-kissed kola nut, seemed to drink up morning light. Her round, liquid eyes held a softness that invited trust. When she spoke, her voice ran clear and cool, like a ribbon of water in a thirsty season. Beauty, however, was not the only crown she wore. Before dawn, Ifeoma balanced a clay pot to the well, swept the hard earth of the compound, and stirred breakfast until steam curved heavenward. She lived with her mother's brother, Uncle Baraka Okoye, his wife Aunt Salwa, and their daughters Tommy and Chioma. Her parents had died when she was 11, taken by a midnight fire that ate through their home in a hiss of sparks and black breath. When the flames settled into ash, the villagers found Ifeoma trembling outside, an ember of a child in a world gone cold. Uncle Baraka had taken her in, or so people said. Inside his yard, however, she was not treated as a child. She was help, a pair of hands that could be summoned and scolded. Ifeoma, wash those plates now. Aunt Salwa would snap even if the girl had just ladled hot pap into their bowls. You think because people call you pretty you'll fly out of my house? She'd plant a fist on her hip and slice the air with a hiss. Ifeoma had learned the economy of silence, speak and sleep outside, cry and be accused of acting. Despite everything, she refused to let cruelty bend her spirit. She greeted elders with two-handed respect, helped traders hoist basins at the market, and never laughed when someone stumbled. Suitors began to notice, at first with shy nods, then with bold comments. Men from town who came to find a good wife in the countryside. Some visited for Tommy, others for Chioma, but their eyes would often snag on Ifeoma, slender in the cooking space, a bundle of firewood braced against her hip. I thought you said your daughters were remarkable, a man once murmured to Uncle Baraka, unaware that Ifeoma was his niece. I'm interested in the one with the quiet eyes. Another, behind a tinted window, simply pointed. That evening, thunder gathered under Uncle Baraka's roof. You are blocking your sister's shine, Aunt Salwa barked, flinging Ifeoma's slippers out the door. Men come and change their mind. What charm do you carry? I don't even talk to them, Ifeoma whispered, tears streaking dust. Shut your mouth. Uncle Baraka struck the air with his voice, and then with his palm her cheek. Don't look at me like that. Small beauty, and you think you're something? I will show you I am your father. From that night, the house hardened around her. She no longer ate at the family tray. The bathroom was locked. She was told to bathe at the back tap. When visitors arrived, Tommy's mockery was sugar-sweet and cruel. Wear your rag, maybe another rich man will propose, she'd say, sloshing suds across the floor Ifeoma had just wiped. Chioma would add, parade your hips like you did when that politician's son came. Ifeoma bowed toward the ground and let her hands speak for her. But something hairline and hidden began to crack. A Saturday sun hung high when a stranger limped into the compound wearing dusty clothes, gripping a wooden cane. A crooked hat shaded his face. The neighborhood watched him like a riddle with legs. He said little, only asked to see Uncle Baraka. Whatever he whispered tilted Uncle's eyes bright as coin. You're serious? You want to marry her? Uncle asked, feigning a humble hush. But you have nothing. I have enough for someone humble, the stranger replied, voice oddly steady. They shook hands the way shopkeepers seal a deal. That night a family meeting was called. Sit, Uncle commanded. We've found you a husband. Who is he? Ifeoma asked, spine straight though her voice was small. No questions, Aunt Salwa cut in. He'll take you as you are, no bride price. Carry your cursed beauty and go. Tommy snickered. Maybe she wants a senator's son. Keep quiet, Aunt snapped. We're doing her a favor. The wedding is in 2 weeks. 2 weeks to a stranger? Without her consent? Ifeoma didn't sleep. Wind hissed through holes in the zinc roof like leaking secrets. Was this her fate, to be traded like an old pot while Tommy and Chioma laughed in new wrappers? The next day she saw the man again at the square, feeding groundnuts to small birds. His clothes stained, his nails trimmed, his posture. When he thought no one watched, momentarily upright. Good afternoon, sir, she said, heat in her cheeks. He turned. Ifeoma, he answered softly. How are you? You know my name? Your uncle screamed it yesterday, he said, almost amused. You are the one I'm to marry. Yes, he said simply. Why me? Because you're different. He stood and stretched back briefly straight as a line drawn with a ruler, then gripped the cane again. See you soon, Ifeoma, he said, limping away. That evening the taunts returned. Tissue jokes, leaf jokes, beggar jokes. Ifeoma kept her gaze lowered, but inside a quiet tide was turning. Not bliss. Not relief. Something like a thin, stubborn peace. A premonition that her story would not end where others wanted it to. At dawn, with a basin of soaked clothes on her hip, she stepped into a breeze cool as palm wine. The sky seemed to hold its breath. Will those clothes wash themselves? Aunt's sail was snapped, scarf tied in a battle knot. You stand like a tree, move. Ifeoma bent over the stones and worked her fingers numb in the cold water. Uncle came out tying a wrapper over his singlet and settled under the mango tree. Tommy Chioma, he called. Meeting. She didn't need to sit to know the subject. I met the man again, Uncle said. He's ready. The beggar? Tommy curled her lip. Yes, Aunt answered, oddly pleased. Best news this year. That girl will finally leave this house. Why not throw her out instead? Chioma asked. So some man can come back and claim her later? Aunt scoffed. This way, she enters shame completely. When people hear she married a limping beggar, no one will ask after her again. Ifeoma's hands stilled in the suds. They were haggling over her like a cracked bowl. She glanced up. No one looked her way. They were too busy planning her humiliation. That evening the stranger returned, polite at the threshold, hat low over his face. Good evening, sir. Good evening, Ma, he said. I came to discuss arrangements. Uncle nodded briskly. Did you bring what we discussed? The man produced a thin envelope from a nylon bag. Uncle counted quickly. His eyes gleamed. Next week, Saturday, he whispered. Later, Ifeoma sat behind the house under a half moon, hugging her knees, listening to frogs practice their choir. A shadow softened the dust beside her. You're not sleeping, a gentle voice said. She turned. It was him. Shock and warning flashed in her. You shouldn't be here. If my uncle sees. I'll go soon, he said. I wanted to talk. About what? Us. He kept a respectful distance. I know this isn't what you wanted. I won't force you. After the wedding, if you want to leave, I'll let you go. She lifted her head. Why would you say that? Because I'm not here to punish you, he said. I wanted someone who looks past faces and sees a person. They stood in the hush between crickets and courage. Good night, Ifeoma, he murmured at last, limping into the dark. Days thickened and so did Aunt's malice. Extra chores, slaps for imagined pride, neighbors' whispers slicing the air. When Aunt tossed a torn lace gown on Ifeoma's bed, stained hem, ripped sleeve, and called it a wedding dress, Tommy and Chioma cackled until their sides ached. Ifeoma traced the ragged seam with a fingertip, then folded the gown across her lap like a quiet decision. Night brought the stranger again, and a question that sat between them like a lantern. Who are you, really? He smiled without answering, a secret stepping back into shadows. The morning before the wedding wore a gray face, not rain, just dullness that matched the weight in Ifeoma's chest. She scrubbed her best wrapper at the back tap, hands numbed by soapy water. From the window, Aunt's voice marched. Tommy, bring out the second bench. Chioma, clean the sitting room. Guests may come early. Guests, but no celebration, vows without joy. Ifeoma pinned the wrapper to the line and turned, and froze. Under the mango tree sat the beggar. Not limping, not hunched, a black hardcover book balanced in his hands. He turned the pages with the ease of someone who had wrestled with many words. She stepped back, invisible, watching. As if he felt her gaze, he looked up and closed the book slowly, then nodded once as though greeting an equal. It wasn't the first oddity. Yesterday, she'd seen him fix a neighbor's broken kettle with a twist of wire and patience. Days earlier, a disturbed man ranted at the market. The stranger spoke a sentence, in clean, fluent English, and the storm in the man's eyes settled. Who exactly was she being given to? That evening, peeling cassava and swallowing ridicule, curiosity clattered inside her louder than fear. When the yard dimmed, she drifted to the back. He was there, as if the night itself had kept an appointment. You came, he said. I couldn't sleep, she answered. I saw you reading. Where did you learn to speak English like that? School, he said. What kind of school? A good one. You keep speaking in circles, she said, half exasperation, half wonder. Who are you? Maybe I'm good at pretending, he offered lightly. That's not funny. I didn't mean it as a joke. They let silence breathe between them. Are you punishing me? She asked at last. No, he said quickly. I wouldn't. Then why me? They're handing me off like scrap. You are not scrap, he said, the softness in his voice turning to steel. You are gold they can't value. Her eyes warmed, but she held the line of her back. What happens after the wedding? Do I sleep under that mango tree with you? You'll come with me, he said. You will be sheltered and safe. That's still not an answer. You'll understand soon. Dawn broke with no drums. No talking drums stitched joy to the sky. No ululation rose from women's throats. The pastor arrived with a thin Bible and thinner patience. Uncle, Aunt, Tommy, and Chioma sat like judges on a low bench. The stranger, cleaner today, stood by the table with his cane. Let's begin, the pastor said, voice clipped, reading a quick verse about love that sounded like a formality someone had forced him to memorize. Do you, Kelechi Obi, take Ifeoma as your wife? I do, he answered, calm as a stone in a stream. And you, Ifeoma, take Kelechi as your husband? Her throat tightened. She found Kelechi's eyes. Kindness lived there, unembarrassed. I do, she whispered. By the authority given to me, you are husband and wife, the pastor declared, already glancing at the door. No rice arc through air, no hands clapped. Kelechi turned to her. Let's go, he said, and they stepped out of a house that didn't say goodbye. They followed a narrow path that curved away from the main road. We're not taking the bush track, she asked. No, Kelechi said. We have a car. A car. The word tripped. Then she saw it, a black SUV drowsing beneath a tree, gleaming like a slice of night. A driver in a crisp shirt hopped out and opened the door. Good afternoon, sir, the man said. Sir. Ifeoma's breath stuttered. Kelechi steadied her with a hand. You're safe, he said, helping her into the cooled air. The door shut with a hush. The village slipped behind them in a wave of dust. She folded her hands in her lap and tried to swallow the new shape of her life. Beggars did not ride in leather and air conditioning. Beggars did not have drivers who called them sir. She turned slowly. Kelechi. Yes. Please tell me the truth. Who are you? The SUV murmured over the road, soft as a lullaby under a heart beating too hard. This car, she said, the driver, the way you sit now, none of it fits the story I was told. I never said I was a beggar, he replied gently. Then who are you? Her voice sharpened. Fear and clarity braided together. I said I do to a man the whole village believed was poor. The man beside me is not that man. He looked out the window, then back at her. My name is Kelechi Obi, he said. That part is true. What I hid was everything else. The name rang a bell in her memory, a distant headline glinting in city light. You may have seen it on news tickers, he said softly. Or on the board of a company in Lagos. Her mouth parted. I own Obi Group, he said simply. She covered her lips with her hand. The transport stations in the east. And certain developments in Asaba and a rice mill in Enugu, he nodded. Why? She began, then stopped. Why pretend? Why limp? Why sit under trees in torn slippers? He laced his fingers. Because I wanted truth. About you. About your uncle. About the way people behave when they think you have nothing. He told her then about his father, once a hard, honest businessman. Your uncle Baraka Okoye worked with him, Kelechi said. He brokered a land deal with a royal family. Greed hollowed the center. He forged signatures, took the money twice. When the dust settled, the land was gone, the title fake, and our name dragged through the market mud. My father lost millions. He carried shame heavier than the loss. It killed him. Ifeoma stared, throat dry. My uncle never said. Of course not. Your aunt knew. She helped him cover it. I came back not for revenge, but for truth. I wanted to see if any clean heart still lived in that compound. So I went as a nobody. The day I met you at the well, you didn't flinch, didn't sneer. You shared water as if I were your equal. When your uncle tried to trade you to me, I agreed. Not to buy you, Ifeoma, but to pull you out. I needed to know your choice when you thought I had nothing. So it was a test, she said, voice low. A proof, he answered. I was looking for someone real. She looked out the window where trees blurred into a green river. You watched me. I hoped, he said. You gave me reason. And now, she asked, turning back. Now, he said, I take you where you'll be safe and seen. The road bent toward a gated estate where gold-washed iron rose like a promise. Cameras blinked awake as the SUV approached. The gates swung wide with practiced grace. Ifeoma's mouth fell open. Beyond lay a mansion with 3 proud levels, fountains tossing silver arcs into the afternoon, and a row of staff in neat uniforms already waiting. A man in a suit opened her door. Welcome, sir. Madam, welcome, he said, bowing slightly. She stepped out wearing the torn lace that had been thrown at her like an insult, dust on her sandals, humility pressed into her shoulders by years of command. Yet the staff greeted her. "Good afternoon, madam," with respect unmarred by curiosity. Kelechi took her hand and led her across cool marble under warm, golden lights. The staircase curved like a ribbon carved from stone. Each room breathed comfort without shouting. Later, washed and dressed in a simple, clean gown a housekeeper had offered with quiet dignity, she stood on a balcony looking over a garden disciplined into beauty. Kelechi came to stand beside her. "So what now?" she asked. "Now you live," he said. "You breathe. You heal. And them, my uncle and the rest? What do you want to happen?" She watched the sky. "I want them to know I'm not the failure they named. But I don't want revenge." He smiled, the kind that starts in the eyes. "Then you're already ahead of them." She turned the plain ring on her finger. It felt heavier here, not as a chain but as a key. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. "Thank you for being you," he replied. "Tomorrow," she whispered after a long breath. "Can we go back?" "So soon," his brow lifted. "I want them to see the beggar and the bride," she said quietly, not as a performance but as a witness. Night found her restless. So much had happened in the narrow ribs of a single day: an unwanted wedding, a ride to elsewhere, the unmasking of a man the village called a beggar who, in truth, owned fleets and factories. She stepped back onto the balcony. Stars scattered like ground salt. A breeze combed her hair. "You should be resting," he said from the doorway, wearing a white shirt and black trousers, still that calm center she had met in shadows. "I couldn't sleep." "Same," he admitted, joining her. They watched the garden in companionable quiet. "They'll believe it's real when you stand before them," he said at last. "I don't need noise," she murmured. "I just need them to see what they tried to bury didn't die." "We'll leave after breakfast," he decided. "It's about 2 hours." "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not throwing me away like they did." "You were never the problem," he said. "Just the easiest target." By 9 the next morning, the SUV waited in a pool of sun. The staff lined the steps, heads respectfully dipped. Kelechi wore a fitted blue suit and dark shades. No cane, no limp. Power settled lightly on his shoulders. Ifeoma chose a white gown trimmed with gold beads, her hair brushed and gathered, skin gleaming soft as new palm oil under morning light. As the gates opened, she laced her fingers and let the world feel different. "Do you think they'll come outside?" she asked. "They won't have a choice," he said. "What if they insult us?" "They can't," he replied. "Not this time." The village square tightened with whispers as the SUV rolled in. Children froze mid-play, backs straightened. Gossip prepared its tongue, and then forgot the words. The vehicle stopped at Uncle Baraka's compound. Kelechi stepped out first, tall, steady, unbothered. Ifeoma followed, and a sound like a gasp passed through the street. Aunt Salwa, broom in hand, petrified at the gate. Tommy, wrapper slack at her waist, halted mid-stride. Chioma peeped from a window and ducked as if the day itself were a reprimand. Uncle Baraka emerged slow, his face colored like sour milk. Kelechi nodded to the driver. "Bring it." A small, polished box appeared. He held it toward Uncle Baraka. "This is for the debt your family owes me." Uncle didn't take it. "What is this?" "Not money," Kelechi said. "Truth." Ifeoma stepped forward and found her uncle's eyes. "You called me cursed," she said evenly. "Said I'd marry madness. Told the world I was nothing. No one moved. Yet here I stand." Her voice didn't rise, it deepened. "I didn't come to insult you. I came to show you seeds grow even when buried." Tears gathered, not pleading, only clean. She slipped an envelope onto a bench near Aunt Salwa. "For you and your daughters. Buy something decent." Aunt Salwa's lips trembled. Tommy retreated. Chioma stared at her toes. Ifeoma faced the small crowd. "I'm not better than anyone," she said. "I'm proof your story doesn't end where others drop you." She turned and walked back to the SUV. Doors shut. Dust lifted. The street stood in the silence people keep for miracles they don't fully like. "You didn't have to give them anything," Kelechi said as the village slid away. "I know," she answered. "But if I left them exactly as they are, I would start becoming like them." "You're nothing like them," he said. She watched trees stitch past. "Then I'm ready," she said. "For what?" "For whatever comes next." They drove home without filling the space with noise. The engine hummed. Birds wrote punctuation in the sky. After half an hour, she broke the quiet. "Did you expect them to treat me that badly?" "I suspected," he said, eyes forward. "Not the depth." "I knew they didn't love me," she said. "I didn't know they hated my light." You were never cursed, he said. Just surrounded by people who couldn't read value. So what now? Now I tell you everything. Lunch waited in a dining room of wide glass and clean lines. Silverware glinted, not to boast, only to be useful. Ifeoma pushed rice around her plate, appetite shy. Kelechi set down his spoon and leaned back. My father died 10 years ago, he began. He was tough and fair, a man who planted buses on the roads of Onitsha and watched them multiply. By 15, I knew the ledger better than my school books. Your uncle, he continued, came with a land deal in Abia. Promised doubled value, quick returns. My father believed, too much trust, too little caution. The papers were dressed in lies. The land had been sold twice. We lost everything on paper, but the heavier loss was reputation. They called him greedy. They called us careless. Shame thinned him to a whisper. He died in his sleep one ordinary night. Ifeoma's fingers tightened around her fork. And they continued like nothing happened. They even spread stories, he said. When I took over, I avoided cameras. Grew slow. Learned to watch. Sometimes I dressed as nobody and tested places. Observed who mocked, who helped, who looked away. I gave some people jobs later. Some I helped vanish from pain. But I was looking for one thing. Someone who didn't perform kindness, someone kind when unobserved. He smiled faintly. I saw you tie a little boy's sandal with your scarf while balancing firewood. You didn't know anyone was watching. That moment told me more than 100 dinner speeches. That was nothing, she said, embarrassed. It was everything, he said. Small kindnesses are the truest mirror. He showed her the house after they ate. A study with shelves like a forest, an indoor garden where rare flowers practiced patience, a quiet room with sunlight and sewing machines. My mother loved tailoring, he said, eyes softened by memory. Even when money came, she stitched joy into cloth. After she died, I built this room in her name. It smells like peace, Ifeoma said, brushing a hand over a machine. That's what it's for. You've been alone a long time, she observed. I had to be, he admitted. Too many people auditioning for a role, not enough being human. And now I don't need a mask, he said, holding her gaze. That evening, they sat in the living room, the walls resigned to their framed history. A photo of young Kelechi on his father's lap, both dressed in white, smiling the extravagant smile of men who still believed the world could be gentle. Do you miss them? She asked. Every day. Would they be proud? I think so. She exhaled. There's something I haven't said. What? I forgive them, she said. My uncle. All of them. Not because they deserve it, but because I deserve peace. He turned to her, something like awe in his eyes. That might be the most powerful thing anyone said to me. Morning came bright and busy, birds at work on a song they refused to finish. Ifeoma dressed simply, clean lines, soft colors, shoes that could walk far. Purpose stood taller than pain. We're visiting a women's center today, Kelechi said. A small project we've funded in a nearby town. Training for widows, single mothers, girls who need a hand that doesn't pinch. A staff member handed Kelechi a brown folder. He flipped it, nodded, tucked it by his side. What's that? Ifeoma asked as they settled into the SUV. A surprise, he said. Another one? This one is special, he smiled. The center smelled of flour and detergent and hope. Women in faded wrappers and fierce eyes paused as the SUV door opened. Then whispers rolled like a tide. It's her, the beggar's bride. No, see how she shines. Look at her skin, it's like morning. Ifeoma refused the pedestal, greeting each woman with the same two-handed respect she'd perfected long before marble underfoot. She laughed small laughs, carried a basin to a table, sat beside an elder to measure fabric, and listened with attention that made people feel like mirrors finally cleaned. On the ride back, she stared out the window, a small smile at the corner of her mouth. They treated me like I belonged, she said. You do, he answered. You always did. I think that's the blessing, standing anywhere and still being myself. That's what makes you different, he said. He handed her the folder. Inside lay property deeds, plots and shops and a bakery site long abandoned. These are yours, he said. In your name. Free. Her mouth opened and closed once. Why? Because I want you to have your own power, he said. Not just wear my name, stand on yours. Tears rose fast and clean. No one has ever done this for me. No one saw you clearly, he said. I do. Within 2 days, the village boiled with news. The beggar was a billionaire. The girl they ridiculed now owned 3 shops on the main road and the title to the old bakery lot. Uncle Baraka sat on his broken bench like a man waiting for his roof to confess. Aunt Salwa paced the kitchen. How can it be her? Tommy folded her arms tight as a vow. Chioma hissed, humiliation hot on her tongue. A neighbor shouted over the fence. Uncle, I hear your daughter is richer than the chief. Better go and beg. Pride clutched their throats, fear loosened their knees. That afternoon, they held a quick council. We must go to her, Aunt declared. Delay will harden her heart. Uncle said little. He scribbled a letter in a wavering hand and sent a boy running to the mansion. When Ifeoma opened it, the paper shook in a breeze she could not feel. What is it? Kelechi asked. My uncle wants to talk, she said. Do you want to see him? She folded the note. Yes. I'll have a car ready. Go alone if you prefer. You trust me that much? I always have, he said. She walked back into her old yard with a gait that owed nothing to defiance and everything to freedom. Uncle Baraka stood to greet her, hands wringing an invisible cloth. Ifeoma, he began. Thank you for coming. Words tangled behind his teeth. What we did, it was wrong. No excuse. She waited, the quiet doing its own work. I know you owe us nothing, he said finally. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Why now, she asked. Because I see clearly, he said. You weren't the problem. We were. Aunt Salwa watched from the door, Tommy and Chioma in the shadows as if sunlight could scold. Ifeoma turned to face them. You called me cursed, she said, voice even. You made me feel like an error. Hate me if you must, but you didn't have to sell me. Tears came, not dramatic, only honest. You threw me away because others saw what you refused to. She reached into her bag, placed a small envelope on the bench. Fix the leaking roof, she told Uncle. And the broken seat. He tried to shape words, but she had already turned, leaving the apology where it belonged, in his hands, not on her shoulders. That night on the balcony, she leaned into the quiet beside Kelechi. I did it, she said. I know, he answered. Do you think they'll change? Maybe, he said, maybe not. You did your part. She rested her head against him and laughed softly when he teased. Look at you, someone people write about. Or gossip about, she said. Either way, he smiled, you shine. For the first time in her life, wholeness didn't feel like something far away. 3 weeks slid by like silk. Each morning, she met a new reflection. Someone raised from ashes, not by gold or marble, but by a decision to forgive what couldn't be returned and repair what could. She set her mind to building. A hostel wing for women who had nowhere to sleep. A skill center where soap and flour and cloth could be coaxed into small businesses. A place for those who only needed a door that opened. On a bright day fat with birdsong, she stood in the skeleton of a new compound, cement blocks stacked like good intentions. This will be the hostel, she pointed. For those with no homes, Kelechi agreed, passing her water. And there, she lifted her chin, a skills hub, sewing, baking, food processing, anything that helps a woman earn. You've turned pain into purpose, he said. Isn't that what life is for? She replied. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Pride, love, respect. Their vocabulary didn't require many words. When she spoke to a hall of girls weeks later, 13 to 18, bruised by life's early elbows, the room fell into a listening so deep it felt like prayer. My name is Ifeoma, she began in her plain white gown and black flats. And like many of you, I didn't have much. She told them about leftovers and torn mats and being passed around like a sack. But I didn't lose my kindness, she said. I didn't lose my heart. Heads bowed, eyes shone. People will name you useless, too quiet, too weak. Hear me, you are enough. You don't need a title to be important. Help someone. Work hard. And when the door opens, and it will, walk through with your head up. Applause rose like a tide. A girl ran into her arms. I believe in you, Ifeoma whispered, meaning it. That night she and Kelechi sipped tea like good elders. Your speech was powerful, he said. I only spoke what I needed to hear once, she answered. That's why it worked. If you never came to that village, she mused, maybe I'd still be scrubbing floors. I would have found you, he said. Why? Because good hearts shine, even under ash, he replied. I want to visit my parents, she said after a silence that felt like blessing. Tomorrow? Yes. They went without the convoy of wealth, just the two of them in a small car. The mango tree still kept watch over 2 mounds of earth. Grass had grown leggy. The ground was dry but familiar. She knelt and touched the soil. Mama, Papa, she said, I made it. Kelechi stepped back, keeping witness, not interruption. I'm not hungry anymore, she whispered. I don't sleep outside. Those who mock me greet me now. But more than that, I am happy. She wiped a single tear and stood. Let's make this place a shelter, she said. Plant flowers. Make it beautiful. We will, he promised. Months turned pages. The tale of the beggar's bride grew legs and traveled. Some said she married madness. Others swore she read the future. Those who knew truth simply said she remained kind when life was unfair. And for that, the world answered with peace and tools to lift others. In her new bakery, she paused beside a girl kneading dough. What's your name? Ifeoma asked. Chisholm, the girl murmured. Do you like it here? Chisholm nodded. Do you know why I built this place? The girl shook her head. Because someone once told me I was worth nothing, Ifeoma said, crouching to meet her eyes. I promised myself no girl would hear that and believe it again. The girl smiled, shy and bright. One day, Ifeoma added, you'll help someone too. That night, Kelechi brought a small box home. A gift, he said. Inside lay a simple silver necklace with a heart-shaped pendant etched with a single word, seen. You remembered, she breathed. I saw you when no one else did, he said, fastening it around her neck. I'll keep seeing you. Epilogue would someday list centers opened, scholarships funded, university podiums, and rooms where world leaders listened. When asked what changed her life, Ifeoma always answered one word. The word that refused to wear lace or marble. The word that had once made a stranger stay and a broken girl rise. Kindness. The next mornings unfurled like disciplined ribbon. Site checks at the hostel wing, supplier calls for the bakery, quiet dinners on the balcony where crickets stitched the evening together. With each step forward, resistance woke from old corners. On a humid Tuesday, a lorry of cement was turned back at the township checkpoint. The officer who waved it off smiled a smile that was not about rules. New policy, he said. Permit revalidation. The driver showed the stamped approval. 2 signatures, a seal, dates as recent as yesterday. The officer shrugged. Policy moved. The lorry wheeled around. By noon, 3 more artifices emerged. A letter discovering zoning anomalies at the bakery lot. An anonymous complaint that the women's hostel would increase moral hazard. A whispered claim that the foundation was a money laundering front. Ifeoma read the stack at her desk in the library, palms flat on the wood, heartbeat steadying itself against the page. Her old life had taught her how to endure storms without forgetting the direction home. She called the project manager first. No shouting, she said. Document everything. Then she called Kelechi. He arrived with a legal team, a flock of dark suits and bright eyes, who listened, asked clipped questions, and began to separate air from bone. A senior counsel, Madame Onika, skimmed the new policy and laughed without humor. A policy is not a law, she said. And there is no policy. She drafted a letter that felt like a mirror held to sunlight. Another associate pulled procurement receipts, photographed stamps, and requested a certified copy of the township register. Within 24 hours, the officer at the checkpoint discovered the policy had, in fact, never moved. Still, the older rumor, the ancient kind told with a stubborn mouth, did not die so easily. By market day, tongues were busy as hands. I hear she is fronting for the man, someone muttered among tubers. What woman has money on her own? Another replied. She bewitched him, said a third. You didn't see the way the beggar became a prince? Laughter stirred like a spoon in a pot. Ifeoma chose a response as old as truth. She went to the market with no convoy, 2 volunteers, and a ledger. At Mama Nwakigo's stall, she bought cassava, asked after the woman's knees, and shared the clinic voucher the foundation kept for such things. At the grain row, she helped measure Gary, her palms dusting white. When a young boy knocked over a pyramid of oranges, she knelt to gather them, building a new pyramid with the careful patience you use to repair a wounded child's pride. Eyes watched, whispers shifted shape. People rarely trust perfection. They recognize consistency. In the evening, she sat with Kelechi on the steps of the indoor garden, the scent of wet leaves filling the room. Sometimes it feels like I must re-earn my right to stand every day, she said. Sometimes we do, he answered. But you don't stand by argument, you stand by evidence. Evidence can be ignored, she said. Repeated evidence becomes a road, he replied. Even stubborn feet follow a road when it's the only way to get home. 2 nights later, the resistance changed pitch. A brown envelope arrived at the mansion gate, unsealed. Inside, brittle papers. Photocopies of a decade-old deed trail, a bank transfer stub, a grainy scan of a signature that had once belonged to Kelechi's father. On top sat a note in cramped handwriting. Not all of us have forgotten. If you still want the truth, the clerk who filed this lives behind the old tannery. No name. No flourish. Just direction. Is it a trap? Ifeoma asked. Maybe, Kelechi said, eyes narrowed on the scan. Or a key. They drove without ceremony the next afternoon. No SUV, no driver. Just two people who had decided to knock on the door of yesterday. Behind the tannery, a narrow path cracked open into a yard piled with metal drums and old blue tarpaulins. A man in a faded shirt stepped out, eyes wary, mouth set. You came, he said, as if he had also sent the letter. He didn't ask for introductions. The world had already introduced them many times without consent. I filed those papers, he said, pointing at the envelope. I didn't know what they meant until the rumors started. Then I knew exactly what they meant. They paid me to misplace the originals. He rubbed his forehead. I am tired of carrying the rot. Who paid you? Kelechi asked. The man blinked. Not your uncle, he said to Ifeoma. A lawyer from the royal family's side. But your uncle signed the sworn statement that made it possible. He slid another document from beneath a brick. This is my copy of the affidavit. I kept it. Fear is a locksmith, but it is also a tenant. I want to evict it. The paper trembled in Ifeoma's hands. Not because her uncle's guilt surprised her, but because the truth was finally doing what truth does when given a door. Coming in. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stood at the balcony rail as distant generators stitched a tired hum. Kelechi joined her with 2 mugs. The law can carry this now, he said. Will you let it? She asked. Yes, he said, without triumph. The law is not a weapon in my hand. It is a river with its own banks. She turned the pendant at her throat, the one that said seen. I forgave them, she whispered. You did, he said. This is not reversal, she said. It's repair. Yes, he answered. Forgiveness is not the abolition of consequence. It is the refusal to become the same kind of broken. The stars held their breath. Somewhere beyond the gate, an old story began to loosen its teeth. The petition was filed on a Monday morning that wore crisp light and courthouse dust. Madame Monica's team did not roar, they arranged. Certified copies. Affidavits. A neat timeline that treated dates like spine, not decoration. The case was not a theater show, no cameras, no marching, just paper doing the quiet work of memory. The magistrate, a woman with gray at her temples and patience in her posture, read without hurry. You are alleging fraud in a land transaction from 10 years ago, with fresh corroboration from a filing clerk, she summarized. You are not requesting damages. We seek declaratory relief and a criminal referral, Madame Monica said. So you want truth to be named, and then for the state to decide what else it should do, the magistrate clarified. Not vengeance. Not vengeance, Madame agreed. News of the filing politicked its way through canteens and WhatsApp groups. In the village, Uncle Baraka heard it first from a neighbor who put too much salt in every story. He folded onto the broken bench, as if the wood had finally confessed it was tired of holding him. Aunt Salwa paced the kitchen, rice unwashed, voice hoarse from prayer and denial. Tommy said nothing. Chioma said too much. They want to disgrace us, she hissed. She wants to see us crawl. Uncle lifted a hand, weary. Hush. Pride is bad counsel. When the summons came, it came with the polite brutality of official fonts. Uncle Baraka stared at the paper, as if staring might rearrange letters into a pardon. The hearing was set for 2 weeks. He slept little and poorly, waking to the exact weight of what it means to be called to account. The day arrived on legs. Ifeoma stood outside the courtroom in a simple navy dress, hair tied cleanly, palms cool beside her. Kelechi adjusted nothing. He had learned to let his presence be in formal armor. Madame Monica greeted them with a nod that meant, we will not hurry truth. We will let it breathe. Inside, benches creaked. The filing clerk, his name was Nkem, sat with shoulders squared by regret and resolve. When called, he walked to the witness stand and told the room what fear had made him do and what age had made him undo. He did not decorate. He did not minimize. I kept a copy, he said, lifting the affidavit like a candle cupped from wind. Because even when I was weak, some part of me knew I might be stronger later. The royal family's lawyer frowned into his papers, as if offense could become a fact. He asked whether Nkem had been paid to lie now. No, Nkem said. But I paid myself every day with shame when I lied then. Uncle Baraka was not called that day. He stood in the corridor afterward, spine tilted as if the building had shifted. When he saw Ifeoma, he did not lift his chin. He lifted his hand open. "I am sorry," he said in a voice that remembered rooms, remembered meals, remembered a small girl carrying water. "Not the small sorry I gave you before. The big one, the kind that doesn't expect a ladder." She looked at him as if truth were a person, and she was measuring whether it had finally arrived. "I forgave you," she said. "This is about more than us." He nodded. "I know." Outside, sandaled feet made their own commentary. "She brought him to court," someone muttered. "She is wicked." Another voice answered. "She is brave." Mercy without clarity is just sentiment. The corridor did not decide. Corridors never do. At home, Ifeoma sat in the library, the house breathing its tender luxury. "Are you okay?" Kelechi asked. "I'm learning the difference between pity and compassion," she said. "And pity is proud," she answered. "Compassion keeps its knees soft." The second hearing folded what the first had opened. The magistrate accepted Nkem's affidavit into the court's mouth. A declaratory judgment would be prepared. A copy would go to the state's prosecutorial desk. No one cheered. Relief is not applause. It is a long exhale. That night, the mansion did not celebrate. It held quiet like a bowl. Ifeoma walked the indoor garden with bare feet on slate, watering leaves with a small copper can. She spoke softly to the flowers her mother-in-law had loved, and it did not matter whether they could hear. Some conversations are for our own ears. "I will not grow thorns," she whispered. "Not even to prove I can." In the village, Uncle Baraka stepped into the church at dusk and sat in the last pew, hat in his lap. He did not ask to be hidden. He asked to be held, and sometimes that is the braver thing. A boy peeked at him, curious. The boy's mother pulled him close, then relaxed. People are always deciding, undeciding, deciding again what to do with those who have fallen. The decision takes years. Sometimes it takes a minute and a hand that simply does not pull away. Progress returned like a climbing vine, slow, insistent green. Permits reaffirmed, deliveries flowed. The bakery's tiled counters shone like possibility. The hostel wing smelled of new paint and lists. On a windy Thursday, Ifeoma arrived at the bakery to laughter, flour dust puffing around wrists, Chisholm singing off-key while kneading dough like it had offended her. "Gentle," Ifeoma said, smiling, covering the girl's hands with her own. "Dough is like a shy friend." Chisholm giggled and tried again. The oven blinked ready. At 11:17 a.m., a shout cut the room in two. "Smoke!" someone yelled from the back corridor. A curl of gray slid along the ceiling, exploratory, then thickened with alarming confidence. The new electrician, cheeks bright with youth and bravado, ran toward the panel. "It's the fuse, too hot," he coughed. Panic, which had been standing politely at the door, came in. Ifeoma's voice found the place between fear and command. "Everyone outside now. Chisholm, take the cash box." "Nkem." She stopped, laughed at herself. The old clerk was not there. "Ngozi, switch off the main." "Bukola, call the fire unit." "Not the number you have. Use the laminated sheet by the door." The laminated sheet she had insisted they post in every room. The one people teased her about as city behavior. Order unrolled like a mat. The women moved. She tied a scarf over her nose, grabbed the small extinguisher from beside the storeroom, and pushed into heat that hadn't yet learned how to bite hard. The fuse box spat and hissed. The electrician shouted, "Don't!" But he was too far to help. She pulled the pin, pressed the lever, and sent white foam hushing over the angry glow. It dimmed and then, like a child who has been told to sit, sulked out. She hit it again. And again. The room sighed in relief. Her chest burned, but her hands were steady. Outside, the women counted one another the way family does when no one told them they were family until danger did. By the time the official truck arrived, lights performing their red gospel, the crisis had demoted itself from story to lesson. The unit lead inspected, nodded at the extinguisher's emptiness, and turned to Ifeoma. "You train your people?" "Every Monday," she said, chest still heaving. He smiled, the rare honest kind, given from one professional to another. "It shows." After everyone had eaten bread that was too warm to slice properly, laughter returned. "Auntie Ifeoma fought fire," Chisholm sang, off-key and perfect. Someone crowned Ifeoma with a paper hat. She let them. Joy is not unserious. It is proof of repair. Later, in the quiet car, adrenaline turning into a private tremor, she stared through the windshield at a sky learning how to be blue again. "I was afraid," she said. "Courage is not the absence of that," Kelechi replied. "I know," she said, voice thin now that the room was safe. "But I tasted the old helplessness for a second. The feeling of being trapped in someone else's house with no key." He did not argue with memory. He held the wheel and her silence. "You made a door," he said finally. "And then you kept making them. Today you made one again." That evening, they hosted a small debrief at the mansion. No scolding, only improvement. The electrician admitted the miscalculation. A new checklist was built. A second main switch would be installed by the back exit. "Redundancy saves lives," Ifeoma wrote on the flip chart, then laughed at herself. "Who am I? A safety officer?" "Yes," Kelechi said, grinning. "And a baker, and a builder, and a speaker, and the person who remembers to laminate phone numbers." Under the shower, steam wrote its own counsel on the mirror. She pressed her palm to the glass and watched the print bloom. Survival is not always loud. Sometimes it is a hand learning not to shake. 2 days later, the bakery reopened. Women arrived with the particular cheer of people who have seen a room survive them. A pastor's wife bought 20 loaves for the women's fellowship, paid extra, and whispered, "I used to speak badly. I'm sorry." Ifeoma squeezed her hand. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. She did not need apology to be a crown. She needed it to be a bridge. By week's end, a circular went up on the community board. Fire safety training. Open session. Saturday 10 a.m. free. People came with notebooks and long stories about the small gas leaks they'd ignored, the extension cords they had made carry impossible destinies. She taught without preaching, using the same voice she used to soothe Doe. In the back row, a girl with the kind of eyes that always look like they've been listening since yesterday scribbled every word. When the session ended, she waited until the room had emptied. "Auntie," she said, "my name is Onion Eye. Can I volunteer?" "Yes," Ifeoma said, smiling. "Come Monday. Wear shoes you can run in." The township decided to hold a harvest festival that year. A secular excuse for drums, a civic excuse for speeches, a quiet excuse for people who had quarreled to stand under the same canopy and call it weather. Stalls sprouted. Pepper soup steaming like kind gossip, beadwork glinting, carved stools arranged like a council of patient elders. The foundation was allotted a corner. Ifeoma insisted they bring the sewing machines and a small oven. "We'll sell bread and tailor hope," she told the team, and they laughed because it sounded like her. She arrived in a simple Ankara dress with sunflowers printed so brightly they looked like they were still making up their minds about being awake. The air smelled of smoke and sugar. Children ran through legs. A drumming circle found a groove and refused to apologize for joy. Ifeoma moved through it like a person who belonged. Because she did. Near noon, she saw them. Tommy, shoulders squared into a version of dignity. Chioma, eyes restless. And behind them, Aunt Salwa, mouth less sharp than memory suggested. They did not approach like conquerors. They approached like people who had walked a long road arguing with themselves about whether to turn back. "Ifeoma," Aunt said first, voice kept to a respectable volume. "Good afternoon." "Good afternoon, Aunt," Ifeoma answered. She did not make them suffer the next sentence. "You're welcome." Silence negotiated the next 10 seconds. Tommy stepped forward. Unpracticed humility spread awkward on her face. "The hostel. I heard you needed volunteers to teach reading. I can help on Sundays. If you'll have me." Chioma rolled her eyes, then rolled them back, terrified of herself. "And I can teach hair braiding. The girls like it." 1,000 sermons could not have preached what those 2 sentences did. Ifeoma held neither grudges nor illusions. "Come on Tuesday," she said. "We'll try it for a month." She smiled a small, careful smile. "Wear shoes you can run in." Aunt swallowed. "Thank you. Do you want bread?" Ifeoma asked because sometimes mercy needs a table. She sliced 3 loaves, handed them over, and resisted the old reflex to say, "Be careful with crumbs." The reflex was not about bread. It was about histories that had taught her to anticipate criticism. She let it go. The women left, balancing the bread and a future their feet were shy to admit it wanted. In the afternoon, the foundation's corner turned into something noisier. Informational, yes, but also celebratory. Women modeled dresses stitched that morning on machines that had traveled across dusty roads to perform at a party. Children, bribed by tiny rolls, stood in lines that looked like order and sounded like chaos. A woman from the neighboring town, her laugh colored with mischief, announced that her husband had eaten the training bread and decided to attend counseling. Because, she concluded, if bread can change this much, then therapy can change the rest. The corner roared. When the chairman took the stage, microphone squealing, sleeves insisting on being too tight, he mentioned Ifeoma by name. It was not a perfect speech, no civic speeches. He called her Mrs. Obi 3 times even though she preferred no title between her and the people. But he said one thing that felt like a notch carved into wood. She has made us reconsider what we call wealth. The crowd clapped. The clapping sounded like something finding its right name. Near sunset, Kelechi arrived, delayed by a site visit, his presence folding into hers like they'd rehearsed an entire life to make this moment look easy. He bought bread he could have eaten for free, danced one unembarrassed minute with the drumming circle, and failed to be serious when an old woman scolded him for buying too little. "Buy for me too, handsome," she teased. He did. On the walk back to the car, Ifeoma's steps slowed. "There's a corner of me that fears this," she said. "This? Being liked," she answered. "It can become its own tyranny. You start trimming truth to keep applause. What will you do? Practice being loved by a few and useful to many," she said. "And keep a small room in me where applause cannot enter." He nodded, eyes warm with the particular pride of a man who knows he married a mind. That night, the house exhaled bread and music. Ifeoma stood at the balcony, the pendant cool against her skin, and watched constellations finish their quiet work. She thought of girls learning to thread needles, of boys counting fire extinguishers instead of daring matches, of men in offices discovering that policies must learn manners before they speak. It was not happily ever after, it was faithfully, even now. The next phase of the foundation felt less like growth and more like architecture. Not bigger, better. The board met in the library, Madame Monica, a pediatric nurse who had left a city post to run the hostel clinic, a teacher known for turning stubborn minds into patient readers, Kelechi, whose silence contributed more than many men's speeches, and Ifeoma, barefoot under the table because thinking traveled faster that way. On the agenda, sustainable revenue, staff counseling, literacy metrics that honored progress without humiliating pace. "We should pay stipends to peer mentors," the teacher said. "Girls learn quickest from girls who learned last month." The nurse added, "Trauma-informed training for all volunteers. We are not just distributing bread and books, we are meeting nervous systems." Madame Monica proposed a legal clinic once a quarter. Birth certificates, small claims, tenancy disputes. Poverty often begins with a missing paper. Kelechi, tracing a line on his notepad, said, "Let's build a bakery school that sells what it teaches." Ifeoma listened, then drew a circle around all of it. "And we tell stories," she said. "Not of rescue, of tools. Not look who saved us, but look what we learned to build." They designed a table for tomorrow, and then went out to eat jollof like people who still understood simple joy. The court's declaratory judgment arrived a week later, couriered in a brown envelope whose weight felt moral. Fraud named, signatures acknowledged, the file forwarded to the state. Newspapers, always hungry, nibbled at the story. Some told it straight. Others salted it with half-truths. A radio host with a gift for dramatic pauses announced, "The beggar's bride strikes back," and Ifeoma rolled her eyes, then laughed because if you don't laugh at headlines, you begin to obey them. Uncle Baraka came by appointment to the mansion's small office. He wore a clean shirt that fit his new humility. "I will do what the law says," he murmured. "I will also work with the church to repay what can be repaid." "That is not ours to decide," Kelechi said gently. "The court and the state will do their work." Uncle turned to Ifeoma. "Can I do community service at the center?" She measured the question, not for trap, but for truth. "Yes," she said at last. "But not in an office. Outside, where you carry chairs and fetch water and listen. Listening is heavy work." He nodded like a man grateful for weight. Over the next weeks, people learned to step around him without stepping on him. He hammered nails and did not make a proverb about it. He apologized with his hands. Tommy began Sunday reading circles. She arrived early, asked no one to clap, and discovered that children are not disobedient. They are impatient with boredom. She learned to make letters into games that squealed. Chioma's braiding class doubled as a conversation hour where girls tasted the new flavor of saying what had happened to them without being asked to garnish it with shame. Aunt Salwa brought pepper soup when she could not bring courage and labeled the pot for volunteers in case words failed her. One evening, Ifeoma found Tommy alone in the sewing room, eyes wet. "I'm sorry," Tommy blurted. "For everything." "Thank you," Ifeoma said. "I kept looking for a grand sentence," Tommy confessed. "But the small one is the real one." "Small ones go everywhere," Ifeoma smiled. Big ones can't fit through doors. They stood together in a quiet that history recognized. Before bed, Kelechi set a thin velvet box on the table. "What is this?" she asked, laughter already rising because he liked small theater. "A vow," he said. Inside lay 2 plain bands, hammered by hand in perfect circles. "We married under a cloud. I want a second ceremony. Just us. No speech. No pastor rushing to another appointment. 2 people, 1 promise, again." She touched the metal, felt how it refused to be smooth. "Yes," she said. They stood in the indoor garden at dawn next day, shoes off, the floor cool with night. "I see you," he said. "I see you," she answered. "Not for what you make possible for me," he added. "Not for what you fix in me," she replied. "Only for you. Only for you." They slid the bands on and did not kiss to seal it. They stood, and the birds sealed it for them. The morning after their dawn vows, the house felt rearranged without moving a chair. The hammered rings clicked softly whenever Ifeoma and Kelechi's hands found each other in small tasks. Passing a cup, shifting a ledger, pushing a window open to let in the garden's green breath. She had always suspected love was less a parade and more a practice, and now the practice hummed, sweep, stir, sign, listen, 2 lives braided without announcing their knots. At the hostel site, the roof sheets went on without argument. At the bakery, the dough rose with obedient confidence. At the legal clinic table in the community hall, a woman walked away with a copy of her birth certificate and a smile that looked like a new door. But quiet does not mean unobserved. A van rolled up to the bakery one noon with a station logo pasted across its side like a bright badge. 2 journalists stepped out, one with a mic heavy as judgment, the other with a camera that pretended not to hunger. "Mrs. Obi?" the mic asked, not waiting for correction. "A word about the court filings against your uncle? About rumors that your foundation is a cover for your husband's political ambition." The camera ate her face without chewing. Ifeoma's spine stayed liquid, not rigid. She had learned that armor can sometimes make you easier to tip over. "We're not a cover for anything," she said. "We're a table. We serve whoever comes hungry for work, for papers, for bread." They asked to film a class. They filmed everything. The cut that aired by evening was sharp and unkind, arranged to make humility look like strategy and generosity like a mask. A neighbor sent the clip to Tommy with 10 exclamation marks. Aunt Salwa called to ask if this meant they should stop coming to volunteer. Chioma went silent, which was louder than her talking. Ifeoma watched the segment in the library with the volume low and the pendant cool against her skin. When it ended, she exhaled the way one does after climbing stairs faster than the body agreed to. "What do you want to do?" Kelechi asked, no heat in him. He had been cooked by heat before and learned when not to boil. "Not chase it," she said. "I want to open the doors wider." "How?" "Open house," she answered, and the 2 words lifted their heads like they had been waiting in a corner. By noon the next day, a chalkboard outside the bakery announced, "Foundation Open House, accounts, programs, questions, all welcome." Inside, tables held printed ledgers with black ink that refused to hide. The program charts hung friendly and frank. How many girls in literacy circles? How many widows in the tailoring cohort? How many certificates printed at the legal clinic? How many loaves baked? How many loaves donated? Madame Monica sat at a corner with a sign that said, "Ask a lawyer, free." The pediatric nurse wore a badge that read, "Ask about trauma, gently." Chisholm and Onion gave tours, their voices a duet of pride and shy giggles. Ifeoma stood by the exit where people leave if they are convinced, and where they hesitate if they are not. People came who didn't have questions, only curiosity's polite cousin. People came who had questions sharpened by cynicism's knife. Ifeoma did not flinch. She explained. She admitted where the program was still learning to walk. She invited the most suspicious voices to observe a class, to sit in a circle, to read one paragraph with a girl who had never been given time to pronounce a word fully. An old tailor with pins pursed between his lips studied the sewing room and nodded once. "Stitches are straight," he said. "This is not a scam." A fish seller who had told the rumor about money laundering at the pepper stall cried quietly in a corner and then asked to volunteer on Thursdays. She told Ifeoma she was sorry. She told the ledger she believed it. Late afternoon slid toward evening, and the camera from the same station appeared at the door again, less hungry now. "We'd like to do a follow-up," the journalist said, voice softer as if it had found the shape of a question that wasn't a trap. "We weren't fair yesterday." "You can film," Ifeoma said, "if you show the women's names the way you show mine." She pointed toward the literacy chart. Credit is a kind of protection. They filmed a little, children reading, women measuring hems, a nurse explaining in plain language how stress hides inside the body and how breath can be a first tool. The segment that aired that night tasted different. It was not apology. Television rarely says sorry, but it was a correction, and the street did its own math. At home, under a sky that had run out of blue and now wore purple, Ifeoma and Kelechi ate quietly on the balcony. The rings clicked softly again. "You opened a house," he said. "I learned it from us," she said. "We kept a room where applause cannot enter. Why not keep one where suspicion can walk in and sit too?" The next morning, a girl who had watched the segment with her grandmother appeared at the bakery door. "Auntie," she said, breathless, "my name is Peace. I want to learn to read. My grandmother says she will bake if you will teach me." Ifeoma knelt to look at her evenly. "We will do both," she said, and the day said amen by smelling of bread. Rain rehearsed for 3 days and then began its show. The first downpour was ordinary. Roofs drummed, gutters shrugged. The old mango tree remembered how to hold its breath. The second felt unlike practice. Wind taking liberties, water refusing to stay in places the township map had assigned it. On the third day, the baker's whistle did not carry as far as usual, snipped by wind shears. Ifeoma stood at the hostel wing's threshold and tasted the sky. Tin, salt, something electrical that reminded her of exams in rooms too bright. By mid-morning, water muscle flexed everywhere. The street outside the bakery turned into a brown ribbon, shallow but insistent. A volunteer ran and soaked to the elbows. "The drainage is failing," she said. "The back alley is a river." Ifeoma sent half the team to move equipment onto pallets, the other half to check that each room's main switch could be reached without a ladder. "We don't panic," she said, voice clear as a bell. "We practice." At the hostel, Tommy had already lined girls against the far corridor, turning evacuation into choreography. "Shoes on. Backpacks on front," she ordered, clapping a rhythm that made bodies respond. "If we go outside and the water is high, we hold wrists, not fingers." Chioma's braiding class evaporated into logistics. She tied scarves into a rope that would not snap, assigning 2 older girls to each end. "We're going to the community hall if this rises past the first step," she said. "And if you think I'm joking, you don't know me yet." Uncle Baraka was outside by the hostel's side wall, a raincoat that was only brave in theory pasted against him. He shouted at no one and everyone. "Turn the main off," someone yelled from inside. "Where is the electrician?" The electrician was across town where transformers had exploded like bad fireworks. The hostel's power line fed into a box that had been placed, disastrously, in a recess lower than the corridor floor. Water licked its lip. "I'll do it," Uncle yelled, already wading toward the box. Ifeoma saw him through the open door from the bakery's van, which had just screeched to the curb with sacks of sand. For a terrifying second, she saw a different picture, 11-year-old herself at a window filling with smoke, and she nearly screamed his name as if he were the past itself. He reached the recess, lifted the lid, and the water flirted with the panel. He pulled the main. The corridor went dark in a sigh that sounded like gratitude. Then he slipped, hit the step with the meat of his shoulder, and disappeared under water that had no business being that high. Kelechi was there before anyone could narrate courage. He grabbed Uncle by the collar, Tommy grabbed Kelechi's belt, and a chain of wrists that would make a poet jealous locked behind them. Chioma, Onion Eye, 2 hostile girls who could do pull-ups like breath. They hauled him out coughing and furious at his own clumsiness. "I'm fine," he sputtered, then winced, then stopped lying. "Hospital," Ifeoma said. "Now." He started to protest. She looked at him once, and the protest did what wise protests do, died at the right time. With power down, and the rain finally conceding that it had been dramatic enough, the evacuation turned from emergency to migration. Girls carried their mattresses like boats. Chisholm and the bakery team handed out bread and gari in bowls that steamed consolation. The community hall, built on slightly higher ground, became a hive that smelled of wet hair and starch. A nurse took Uncle's blood pressure, shook her head, and told the driver to keep the engine talking to the road all the way to the clinic. In the clinic's waiting room, Ifeoma sat with a towel around her shoulders like a cape thrown on a general by soldiers who could not believe the battle was already over. Kelechi paced with the forward lean of a man trying to outrun a thought. The doctor came out with a prosaic report. A shoulder dislocation, not a break, rest, a sling, and humility. "He cannot lift for weeks," the doctor said. He must accept being helped. Back at the hall, Tommy's reading circle resumed, as if refusing to give the storm the last word. "We are not doing vowels today," she declared. "We are telling flood stories." Girls lined up to take turns speaking without the burden of making it pretty. One said she was not afraid, she was excited. This made the room laugh. Another said water makes her angry because it does not ask permission. A third whispered that when the light went off she heard her mother's voice though her mother was far away, and she realized voices can travel where bodies cannot. Chioma braided quietly while they spoke, turning wet into workable. At dusk, Uncle was carried into the hall like a man carried by his younger self. He looked embarrassed about all the eyes and then relieved to be among them. Ifeoma knelt by his chair. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'm the one who should say it," he answered. "I turned a switch, but you've been turning them for months." She touched the sling and smiled. "Good. You finally let something hold you." That night, when the girls were settled under blankets that smelled like laundry and rain, Ifeoma lay on the hall floor beside Kelechi, sharing a pillow like teenagers who had decided to be saints later. The roof ticked, the night creatures negotiated. The pendant pressed a small circle into her collarbone. "I had a flash," she said into the near dark. "Of the fire. Of a window I couldn't open." "We opened it," he said, hearing what her words were pointing at. "We did," she answered. "Today, and then again tomorrow, and then again the day after that. Until opening is the habit," he murmured. "Until then," she said, and the hall slept. The flood rewired streets and schedules, but it also rewired allegiances. Men who had cultivated indifference brought shovels. Women who had hidden their competence behind jokes began directing traffic with a tone that expected assent and received it. The bakery became a distribution point for food and dry blankets. The hostel wing, once the water receded and the wall dried, began to carry the sound of hammers that had learned patience. Ifeoma stood in the middle of this choreography and realized the essential genius of a table. It makes room. "Let's design the bakery school," she told the board, and heads lifted as if called by name. They named it Omalika School after Kelechi's mother. Beauty not as prettiness, but as fit, things fitting their purpose. The curriculum was work, sanitation, sourcing, costs, heat, safety, and the theology of bread. How feeding people can be an ethics as well as an economics. Fees were scaled, scholarships were quiet. Graduates without space to rent could join the cooperative stall Ifeoma negotiated at the market, a rotation of ovens and names. Next, the legal clinic widened into Paper Day, a quarterly festival of forms where the magistrate herself sent a clerk to stamp what used to take 3 visits. "Justice is sometimes just a cue made sensible," Madame Monica said, delighted each time she got to make the law act like a person with manners. A proverb was written on the chalkboard in 3 languages. A name on paper is harder to steal. The most delicate room to build came last. A circle for repair that was not a court. Ifeoma wanted it. Kelechi wasn't sure at first. "The state is moving," he said. "Let it finish." "This is not about verdicts," she answered. "It's about voices. What if it becomes a spectacle? We won't let it." They invited Nkem, the clerk who had testified. They invited an elder from the royal family's side who was not implicated, but who could carry the weight of a history. They invited 3 community leaders who had once repeated the wrong story and were now brave enough to correct it. They invited Uncle Baraka, sling off now but caution still on him. Ifeoma set the rules with the same clarity she used for fire drills. No interruptions, no counter-arguments, no applause, I-statements. Truth only, no recording. The circle sat on plastic chairs that did not pretend to be anything else. Nkem spoke first, his voice steady as someone walking across their own fear with new shoes. "I made a choice," he said. "I took money. Then I took shame. This is me putting it down." The elder from the royal house cleared his throat and said something rare. "The palace is not always a school. Sometimes it is a mirror that nobody wants to look into. We had men who forgot the boundary between counsel and conspiracy. I cannot fix yesterday. I can fix what is in my hand." He placed a folder on the table, land transfer documents for a small parcel near the market, designated for community education. "For the women's cooperative," he said. "No ceremony. Just work." Uncle Baraka did not perform. "I was greedy," he said. "I wore that greed like perfume and called it hustle. It made me blind. It did not make me happy." He looked at Ifeoma and did not flinch this time. "I don't ask to be declared good. I ask for the kind of work that makes a man useful again." The 3 community leaders spoke last, acknowledging their roles as rumor factories, offering their voices now as rumor filters. When the circle ended, nobody clapped. They stood the way people do after a prayer that refuses to be content with words. Outside, the air had that post-rain clarity that makes colors honest. Ifeoma walked with Kelechi to the edge of the yard. "You were right," he said quietly. "Voice is a kind of justice." "Silence had too much real estate in that story," she replied. "We are rezoning." The land parcel became a new room, a joint bakery and tailoring classroom under a zinc roof that did not apologize for being practical. They named it the long table, because every decision inside it had to be made as if another person needed to sit. The first cohort graduated in aprons they had stitched themselves, each woman quilting her name in thread like a signature learning to sing. Tommy taught reading tied to recipes. Chioma braided on Saturdays and snuck in business math between cornrows. On a morning bright as a scrubbed pot, Ifeoma took Kelechi to the mango tree where her parents lay and showed him sketches for a small pavilion. Benches, a water point, a notice board where people could post missing papers and found things. "I want to call it Mango House," she said. "A rest for travelers, a shade for whoever needs it, and a place where we hold remembrance without turning it into a museum." "We will build it," he said, the way he said all the sentences that held weight and asked for bricks. At night, ordinary married life insisted on being part of the legend. They argued about salt, she put less. About whether the indoor plants were overwatered, they were. About whether the pendant should be worn to bed, she said yes. It felt like being seen even in sleep. They invented a ritual. 3 things they noticed about the day that were not on any ledger. How peace still said G, like it was trying to escape. How Uncle counted chairs at the end of events as if chairs were a penance he could finish. How the moon that week looked like a thumbprint. Small becomes scaffolding when you build every day. Language kept trying to put Ifeoma on a shelf. Invitations arrived with titles glued to them like labels on jars. Mrs. Obi, wife of industrialist, billionaire bride. At first she shrugged. Jars take labels and still hold spice. But a day came when the labels confused the clerk at an agency so thoroughly that the paper he issued was almost correct but not quite, and almost had consequences. "I need to standardize how I'm called in public work," she told the board. "Not because I mind the misses, but because names on paper are levers." They agreed, and the foundation registered its documents under Ifeoma Okoye-Obi to anchor both histories. The orphan niece and the woman who had married into a name she now held with tenderness, not subservience. With names aligned, invites multiplied, as if bureaucracy had been the true gatekeeper of visibility. A university asked her to deliver a convocation address. She stood at the podium in a dress that didn't try to impress anyone except her pockets, because pockets are loyalty, and spoke about small rooms. The tiny space in her where applause cannot enter. The extra chair at the long table. The window the girls at the hostel learned to open with their own hands. The room inside each graduate where kindness lived even when it went unfed. "I wish you success," she finished. "But more than that, I wish you usefulness. Success is applause. Usefulness is harvest." After the speech, a party chairman asked to visit the center. He arrived with photographers who didn't know how to be quiet. He walked the corridor practicing his smile for cameras that were not even on. In the office, he asked if she would consider running for local office. He called it leveraging momentum. He called it amplifying impact. He called it many things that sounded like microphones. Ifeoma poured him water and considered. "We build tables," she said at last. "Stages are also tables, but they are high and often too narrow. If I climbed one, I would have to spend 4 years telling people why I climbed. I would rather spend 4 years bringing chairs." "You'd have influence," he persisted. "I have it," she said, not as a boast. "It's just not the kind with sirens." He left with 3 loaves of bread he said were for his mother. They probably were. Everyone is someone's child. At the center, lives kept returning to themselves and then growing a little beyond. Chioma saved enough to lease a corner shop and open braids and books, where girls could get their hair done and do their homework in chairs that were actually comfortable. She hung a sign near the mirror. "We don't whisper shame here." Tommy sat for the teacher certification exam and passed. When the result came, she did not shout. She walked to Ifeoma, hugged her without permission, and then cried like faucets. "I am not the mean girl anymore," she said into Ifeoma's shoulder. "I'm the one who brings extra pencils." "Both take work," Ifeoma said, laughing into tears. "I prefer the second." Aunt Sale was pepper soup, which had once been a vehicle for apology, turned into a business. She partnered with 3 widows and opened 4 pots, a stall outside the market where the broth tasted like forgiveness, and the fish was always cleaned as if dignity were the recipe. She did not try to defend old versions of herself. She did not grovel. She worked. People tipped more than the soup demanded. Uncle Baraka kept showing up with his sling as a memory tied to the past. When it came off, he did not graduate himself to management. He kept carrying chairs, fetching water, learning to be the man who closes windows at night and opens them in the morning. Once, in a board meeting, he asked if he could speak. "I don't want my name on any plaque," he said. "But I want to plant trees. Real ones. Shade is how villages apologize." They gave him a budget and a list of seedlings. He spent afternoons digging, and the schoolchildren began calling him Uncle Shade. An invitation arrived that would have once riveted the village. A Lagos gala where people wore their net worth on their wrists. Kelechi could not refuse without insulting a partner who had been righteous when righteousness was expensive. He asked Ifeoma if she wanted to go. She did not, but she went because sometimes love means showing up where your feet are not excited and staying anyway. She wore a plain dress with a shawl her mother might have loved. When the MC mispronounced Okoye Obi, she corrected him with a smile that did not draw blood. She gave a 2-minute thank you speech when they handed her an award shaped like a flame. "Fire is complicated," she said into the glittering room. "It cooks. It warms. It also destroys. Our work is teaching it manners." On the drive home, she took off her shoes and pressed her toes into the car mat like grass. "Big rooms are loud," she said. "We'll build our own rooms and control the volume," Kelechi answered, glancing at her bare feet with a softness that remembered dawn vows and garden birds. At Mango House, the pavilion rose slowly, benches, a water point, a small tiled square where candles could sit without scaring the floor. On the notice board, someone pinned a flyer for missing goat with a drawing that looked like a dog. Someone else pinned found earring with a sketch so exact it might have been art. Ifeoma added a card. "Free counseling Thursdays, no forms, no fuss." She drew a tiny mango in the corner because people remember fruit more than words. Names returned to their right homes. Papers matched faces. Faces matched stories. Stories learned to be less tidy, more true. And the village, stubborn, sweet, sometimes mean, lifted its head as if trying to remember a song. The first graduation at the long table arrived on a morning fat with possibility. 10 centers now bore the foundation's name in tidy letters that looked like they had practiced penmanship. The bakery school, the tailoring workshop, the hostel wing, the literacy corners, the legal clinic, Mango House, Fire Safety Saturdays, Paper Day, braids and books, and 4 pots. Each had its own smell: flour, starch, soap, ink, wood smoke, guava leaves steeping in kettles too old to be retired. Ifeoma walked among them the week before the ceremony like a farmer who knows every stubborn patch in her field and loves it more for needing extra water. The graduation canopy went up at dawn, rope tight, chairs in rows that made sense. The women arrived in aprons stitched with their names. Chinaza, Folake, Eno, a wheel. Letters thick in thread like a signature that refuses to fade in wash water. Children sprawled on mats with crayons. A drummer tuned a talking drum whose hide had been cured under a moon that had now moved on to other appointments. The chairman came without photographers and bought a plate at 4 pots. The same TV crew came and, this time, asked where they should sit so as not to block grandmother's view. Ifeoma stood at the edge, making sure nothing important was missing, and discovering that important things are rarely the ones we make a fuss about. Enough water, a shade spot for the elder who couldn't sit long, a quiet corner for the girl who needed to cry for reasons she couldn't name. Kelechi found her there with a paper bag from the printer. "Programs," he said, shaking the bag like it carried a small animal. She laughed and kissed his knuckles where flour had left ghost fingerprints. The ceremony refused to be slick. Speeches stalled because voices trembled. The microphone misbehaved and then repented. A baby punctuated Tommy's reading metrics with an opinion of her own, and the canopy applauded. Nkem, cleaned up in a shirt that fit a man learning to fit his life, handed out literacy certificates with the reverence of a librarian. Chioma presented the first cooperative ledger to the Market Council. Every page signed by 2 women and audited by a 3rd. The pediatric nurse stood and asked everyone to stretch because bodies are part of learning. Ifeoma gave a small speech that stayed small on purpose. "We measure growth by tools built, not by headlines. If you have a tool, teach it. If you need one, please ask. Asking is courage." They cut a ribbon to open Mango House, and the pavilion immediately forgot it was ribbon day and went to work. A traveler refilled his bottle, a widow sat to rest, 2 boys posted found. 1 sandal with a drawing that looked like a potato but would somehow summon the right foot. Ifeoma took Kelechi's hand and led him to the mango tree, to the mound where she had once wept and then begun again. She placed a small basket of fruit at the base. "For you," she whispered, and did not need to specify which you. Parents, past God, all of them listening from their various balconies. In the afternoon, a quiet parade formed itself without a master of ceremonies. Graduates carrying trays of their bread and dresses they had stitched for each other. Hostel girls holding placards that read "We read here and ask us what we built." For pots ladling broth into cups that warmed hands and made tongues grateful. The long table, literal this time, planks hammered across trestles, held food that had been earned twice. Once by labor, once by love. People sat where they could, and where they couldn't, they stood and leaned and felt included anyway. Uncle Shade, formerly Baraka, rose to make a fool of himself and did not. He spoke for 3 minutes on Saturday. "I planted trees," he said simply. "Please water them when I am tired." Aunt Salwa handed Ifeoma a sealed envelope without drama. Inside later, at home, Ifeoma would find receipts. Every donation Aunt had received for 4 pots documented with the care of someone who wanted to be trusted. On the bottom, a note, not to prove. To practice. S. At sunset, the sky gave them a graduation gift. A color nobody had the right name for. Girls lay on their backs and named it anyway. Mango Peel Gold, River Ember, God's Scarf. Peace, who now said gee like she had forgiven it, tugged Ifeoma's gown. "Auntie," she said. "What is next?" "Tomorrow," Ifeoma answered. "We open again." Later, when the chairs were counted and the pots scrubbed, when the last grandmother had been walked home and the last volunteer had been talked out of staying to do one more thing, Ifeoma and Kelechi sat on the balcony with their shoes off and the hammered rings warm from the day. The city's far-off lights blinked like people trying to stay awake in a lecture. Crickets returned to their gossip. The pendant lay against her skin, a small moon. "Do you remember the night we left the village?" she asked. "I remember the sound of the door shutting," he said. "I thought my life was a small room with no windows." "You built windows," he said. "The room kept growing. Now it's a house with many doors. People come and go. No one leaves empty-handed." She leaned on his shoulder and watched the dark turn generous. "When they ask me what changed my life," she said, repeating a line she would never retire, "I will still say it." "Say it," he said, though he knew. "Kindness," she whispered. "It's the tool that makes all the others possible." In Mango House, a girl finished a paragraph and didn't stumble on the last word. In the hostel, a light was turned off by a hand that had learned to check the window first. In the bakery, dough rested, rising without boasting. In the village, a man watered a sapling that would shade a generation that did not yet have names. And under a sky that had run out of names for color again, the long table, real and metaphor, held. The end.